One, two, three, four.
You are listening to Skylight, the Skylight Books podcast. Skylight Books is a general interest bookstore in the Los Feliz neighborhood in Los Angeles. You can shop with us from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or visit us online 24/7 at skylightbooks.com. Follow along at Skylight Books Instagram and Twitter. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening, and now on to the episode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Skylight Books. We're so excited to be here tonight with Richard Lange to celebrate his new novel, ROVERS. He's joined by Jonathan Ames. My name is Hallie. I am the Assistant Events Manager at Skylight Books. Richard Lange is the author of the story collections Dead Boys and Sweet Nothing and the novels This Wicked World, Angel Baby, and The Smack. He is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the International Association of Crime Writers Hammett Prize, a Crime Writers Association Dagger Award, and the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He lives in Los Angeles. He will be joined in conversation by Jonathan Ames. Jonathan Ames is the author of I Pass Like Night, The Extra Man, What's Not to Love, My Less Than Secret Life, Wake Up, Sir, I Love You More Than You Know, The Alcoholic, The Double Life is Twice as Good, and most recently, You Were Never Really Here. He's the creator of 2 television series, Blunt Talk and Bored to Death, and has had 2 amateur boxing matches fighting as the Herring Wonder. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Okay. Thank you, Hallie, and thank you,
That
Richard.
bio wasn't quite up to date. Did they mention a man called Doll?
Telepathically, it was mentioned.
Yeah, I didn't hear her mention that. His newest book is A Man Called Doll, which everybody should read.
I have an old bio.
It's all right.
Old bio.
Anyway, well, we're here to discuss Rovers, a book which I read several months ago and just loved it, just tore right through it. Beautiful writing, got into the minds of all these different characters, which I want to talk with you later. I empathized with all of them, felt for all of them, and just loved it as a page turner, filled with also pathos, and I don't know, it's just a brilliant, fun, engaging, entertaining
Thanks,
book.
Jim.
All right, so
Thank you.
so now what's going to happen tonight is Richard's going to read for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to ask him some questions about writing and specifically about Rover. So I will turn it over to Richard to read from his wonderful novel.
Okay. I'm just going to read from the first chapter. I think I'll read the dedication first. I dedicate all my books to my wife because she's my wife. And so I'll read this one. It's for Kim Turner. There are darknesses in life, and there are lights, and you are one of the lights, the light of all lights. And strangely enough, I found that in Bram Stoker's Dracula. So that's why I read it, because it's kind of relevant to this book. Just a bit about Rovers. It's a revenge thriller set in 1976, leading up to the Bicentennial, and it's set in like the week before the Bicentennial. And what sets it apart from maybe your average revenge thriller is that the main characters are 2 brothers who happen to be what are called in the book rovers, which are creatures of a sort that have to drink blood. They can't go out at night. They will live forever unless they're killed in certain ways. So basically they're vampires. But yeah, they're 2 brothers, and one of them is mentally challenged. So the log line for the book, or the elevator pitch, or whatever you call it, was of mice and men with vampires. That's how it began. it expanded into a lot more than that. But just setting you up that it's these two brothers and they get in a lot of trouble, and things build to a climax, and it ends in 4th of July in Las Vegas on New Year's Eve. So I'm going to just go ahead. 4th of July in Las Vegas. I'm going to just go ahead and read from the first chapter. Jesse dreams the old dream for the first time in months. He hasn't been sleeping much lately, and when he hasn't dreamed. On bad days, he lies there for hours, tossing and turning. On good ones, he drops his lids and dies until the sun goes down. Today, though, one minute he's staring up at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room, listening to the maid argue with the manager out in the parking lot, listening to Edgar snore on the other bed, and the next, the dream. It reappears like a friend he hadn't known how much he missed until, hey, there he was again, the rascal. It's the only dream he dreams, so he's fond of it. It's the only time the world isn't just what it is. He's walking down a road, always the same road, a road he's traveled in his waking life, but not one he can place exactly. Somewhere near Barstow, maybe, somewhere outside Las Cruces. Scrubland, where the plants bristle with thorns and the hot wind never stops blowing, where train tracks slice across salt flats like ropey old scars, and the air is so clear it's what's 10 miles away looks like it's 2. He's walking alone on this road, and how he knows it's a dream is it's daytime. He hasn't been outside during the day in more than 75 years. 75 years since he's felt the sun on his face, 75 years since he's lain under a tree and run his fingers over leaf shadows flitting across a patch of warm grass, 75 years since he squinted through his lashes to pin a cawing raven against the noon glare. For the past 3/4 of a century, he's lived by night, in the ebon hours when monsters hunt and good folk keep to their houses. Since he turned, every dawn's been a death sentence, every sunbeam a white-hot razor. That's why he's overjoyed whenever he dreams his only dream, when he finds himself walking that road under the blazing sun, under a few wisps of cloud unraveling across the sky. A bounding jackrabbit kicks up dust. A breeze brings a whiff of sage. He comes upon an empty pop can and gives it a kick. Light and warmth worm their way into the coldest, darkest thickets inside him. And if he never woke again, he'd be fine. This would be enough. The road, the sky, the sun, forever. Jesse opens his eyes. The ceiling is dark. Night has come down. Jesse, what? I pissed myself. Jesse sits up. His brother Edgar is lying in the other bed in his own mess. Even Abby, Edgar's cat, has more sense than that. At least she was smart enough to jump down to the floor. Jesse exhales his disgust. He doesn't mean for Edgar to hear it, but hear it he does. I'm sorry, Edgar says and starts to cry. It's all right, Jesse says. You've been doing better. 10 years have passed since Edgar last had trouble holding his water, and Jesse can't figure out why the problem has returned. He asked Edgar if he was scared or worried about anything, and Edgar said no, so he supposes it's simply another of his bad behaviors that'll keep coming back now and then, like the shoplifting and the lying and the wandering off, something he'll be training out of him again and again for all eternity. Can he really be that simple? You teach a dog a trick, a horse, and it remembers forever. So how come every few years he has to remind a grown man not to steal potato chips from the store? Could it be Edgar's messing with him and secretly reveling in his frustration? Jesse makes him walk into the bathroom, take off his undershorts, and put them in the sink. Edgar's not crying anymore and seems to have forgotten he ever was. Not too hot, he says when Jesse turns on the shower. He's a big fella, bigger than Jesse, over 6 feet tall, round as a barrel and getting fatter every year. He'll always be 50 years old outside and 10 inside his head, a child bearing a man's shell. And Jesse will always have to look after him, because he promised their mother he would. What else could he do? A dying woman's last wish. He unwraps the cake of soap that came with the room and hands it to Edgar. Edgar smells it, licks it, and makes a face. It's soap, not candy, Jesse says. Smells like candy, Edgar says. He sings while he showers his current favorite song about truck drivers who band together to outwit the highway patrol. He knows all the words, including the talking parts, and even cups a hand over his mouth to mimic the sound of a CB radio. Wash everywhere, Jesse yells over the singing. Under your arms, your ass. 10-4, good buddy. Jesse strips the sheets off the bed. The mattress is already so filthy that one more stain won't be noticed. He tosses the sheets onto the bathroom floor. We'll wash them in the shower later. Edgar stops singing. I'm hungry, he says. There's Pop-Tarts, Jesse says. I mean, really hungry. Okay, so that's where I'll end it, and you can read the rest of the book to find out what happens.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's so nice to be back in the book. I don't know.
I hate reading it now because I never had an audiobook before this one, and I listened to some of the audiobook, and they do it so great that I'm like, well, I'm a weak imitation of them, but I do my best.
Well, I thought you read well, and I did have just a funny idea just now. I don't know if you'd ever do it, but let's say you can give a live reading again. If there's a way you could project that, like hidden from your pocket, the audiobook, and then move your mouth, it might.
Believe me, I contemplated it, or just playing it. Let it play behind me, because
you could stand there holding the book while it plays. I don't know, some weird meta.
I'm serious. I hate hearing my own voice, and I hate seeing my face. That's why these Zooms are so strange. I just try to keep focused on you handsome devil.
Yeah. Well, anyway, one thing just before I ask the first question, just hearing the dream, I think one of the things I love about the book is that that felt like a metaphor for everyone with a recurring dream or this existential landscape. And then, or even then when we come out of the dream, this 50-year-old body forever holding a 10-year-old boy. I don't know. It's just like, what I love is that there's a resonance to your work that goes beyond like the surface labels of genre, where these are human beings that I really fall in love with. Mm-hmm. And then what's great is that I'm in a thriller with them and I love them, so. Anyway.
This was a hard one to, in all my sort of work, I try to work up sympathy for these sort of marginal characters and people who people that other people would call losers or things like that. But this book, and I've done that throughout the books. I've kind of considered it just a touchstone in the work of trying to do that, to build empathy for the reader, for people they might not normally empathize with. And in this book, it was particularly hard because, most of the people in it are all killers. And, you witness the people that you're following in the book and you're building an affinity for, killing people. And so it was kind of a trick to try to pull that off. And I wasn't sure that, it was going to work, that I would get people to care about these characters. But I think most people are if they don't love the characters, they at least understand their struggles. Like you said, they look at them as human beings in a world rather than, villains and heroes and things like that. There's a lot of gray areas.
Yeah. Before I get to my first question, along that line of empathy, one of the things I loved in the book, and people get into it, there's like a sort of biker gang of these rovers, vampires called the Fiends. And one of the things that's so great and such a rich world, a Richard Lange world, it's a rich world of these like backstories of these long lives and who because the Fiends are all paired like either as friends or lovers. And so even though they were the Fiends and the bad guys, I was also rooting for the one couple, what was the name? Antonia and Elijah. I'm like, oh, they're such romantics on some level. I was hoping that they could make it because they were slightly more rational, even if they were evil. Anyway, right. But I just wanted to walk the viewer a little bit who might be meeting you for the first time through you as a writer, and every writer I feel begins as a reader, and anyone who's in the writing game loves books and they love to read. And so then like, you just feel the need to sort of make these things that you have loved yourself. So I wanted to ask you, what were your childhood books? What were the first things that kind of got you into reading or opened up that reading maybe was more than just like a quarterback biography that you bought in the fourth grade. I used to get.
You know, I started reading pretty early as a child, and you know, picked it up quickly, and so by the time I was 8 or 9, you know, I was reading Jules Verne. That was big for me, and as a kid, I read a lot of science fiction. I read a lot of horror books. I got very into comic books about 10 years old, and so that was a big thing for me. But you know, I also remember picking up whatever my mom had laying around, the adult paperbacks of the times. Like remember she had the Poseidon Adventure novelized. Well, actually, I think that was a novel before it was a novelization by Paul Gallico, and so I read that, and you know, the Exorcist, and usually it was attached to movies because that was how you sort of learned titles back then of adult books. I remember a shocking one was Last Tango in Paris. You know, I found that in the drawer, and that was, you know, I was like 12, and that blew my mind. But it got, you know, but then around, you know, 15, 16, 15, 14, I started reading Hemingway and Steinbeck, and just because I'd be at the bookstore buying like the Doc Savage, you know, I was into the Doc Savage series, and you know, I read a lot of pulp and crap. And then I started, you know, I'd heard these names, Hemingway, Steinbeck, and I'd just pick up the books off the shelf and take them and read them. And pretty quickly, around that time, I remember picking up On the Road. I completely stopped reading science fiction and horror and only read, you know, real literature. I don't know what you call it, you know, mainstream literature, non-genre. I never went back to reading. Since then I have not read, you know, barely any sci-fi, barely any horror, and kept to, you know, the classics. Then when I went to college, you know, of course it was Raymond Carver was really big then, and so that was a, you know, huge influence. But yeah, it started out with a you know, just the sci-fi pulp books that were around. So
yeah, well, along those lines, just quickly, my own little Kerouac anecdote. I was 17 years old, I think, taking a bus back from New York City, from the Port Authority, because I would go into New York City for fencing lessons, like a Holden Caulfield. But I was obsessed with hitchhiking. This was 1981, and there was a guy, and this other kid and I, we would take the bus, you know, into the city, then the subway down to the West Village, take fencing lessons at NYU, then drink in the bars on Bleecker Street because they didn't card, then get the bus back. And I had this fantasies of running away and hitchhiking at that time in my life. And there was a guy with a rucksack in the back of the bus. And I said, even though he was on a bus, I said, "Do you hitchhike?" He's like, "Yeah, sometimes," because he looked like a hippie. There were still hippies.
Right.
Like, how do you do it? Like, I just didn't know. And he said, "You want to know how to do it? Read this book, On the Road by Jack Kerouac or something." So sure enough, I went to the bookstore, found it, fell in love with the Beat Generation. But anyway.
Yeah, that was a big intro. I mean, the Beat Generation like led to a lot of things for me, you know, a big intro to literature.
Yeah. But so, I mean, for me, I know as I've kind of gone into writing, trying to write more page turners, or the kind of books that maybe you've been writing your whole career, even though they're extremely literary, who are your role models now? Because like for me, you know, when I'm trying to write my books, I might be thinking of Richard Stark, or lately Ross MacDonald. Like I'm sort of responding to these guys. Who are you responding to in your work, would you say, if you are?
I'd put like at the top, when I first had to write a novel, I had a book of short stories that I was trying to sell. And a guy found one of my stories in a literary magazine, an agent, and he was starting an agency, and he wanted me to be his first client. And he found a story, and he said, "Hey, do you have enough of these for a collection?" And I'd been publishing stories in these magazines for 10, 12 years, and you know, getting paid in copies and whatever. And he said, "I can get you a contract, I think, but you have to have a novel to do that, because nobody will buy a book of short stories alone." Mm-hmm. So I had to write a novel. And I wasn't a huge crime fan, by any means. I mean, I read crime, but I did really love Elmore Leonard, and I'd read almost everything by him, but I almost didn't think of that as crime. I just thought of it as literature. I don't know. And then, so I definitely, when I sat down to write, I had that in mind. I had, I think, Richard Price, I'd read Clockers, and I kind of knew the level that I wanted to try to shoot for. I mean, I don't know if I've ever attained it, but those were the things I was going for. And a Robert Stone book called Dog Soldiers, those were the things that I did. So I don't know if we were talking about this the time we had drinks, but Robert Stone, I reread Dog Soldiers recently, and I see that he writes what are called convergence narratives. I think where you have these 4 stories happening, and then they're all moving into where they come together. You wonder, they seem separate, but then they come together. And I noticed, I think every one of my books has had a convergence narrative. I don't know if I got that from him, but I definitely read Dog Soldiers before that, before doing those. But yeah, I needed a genre. I needed a hook to hang a novel on because I'd only written short stories. So I didn't even know if I could write a novel. I never thought that would be a possibility. I just thought I was 42 years old, and I thought I'll just be writing these short stories in these little magazines. And, that's cool. I can brag at parties and whatnot because none of my other friends write. So if I publish in these magazines, I still seem cool to them. So, but because I needed to write a novel, I said, well, I know the structure of someone, the murder mystery investigation structure of someone dies at the beginning and you find out at the end, and a guy is going along, a path of finding out what happened. And I said, that's something that I can anchor this on, and it'll keep me moving, because my short stories don't really move. They're just sort of a collection of scenes or incidents or moments that somehow I tie them together in the end. But for a book, I wanted to keep the reader moving. I like books, maybe when I was younger, I had a more artful taste, or like more open taste. But I could read a book then, a French novel that takes place all during a dinner in one room, and be an existential discussion, and I could do that. But when I sat down to write, I needed to make a living doing it too. So I knew I wanted to get readers something that would make readers read. And I figured the crime thing would be it. So I didn't intend to be a crime writer, but I fell into it, and it happened. And then, here I go and screw it up by writing a horror novel, which was a big swerve.
Well, this was going to be a later question. But I'll ask it now. What do you think of these labels, crime writer or mystery writer or horror, or, what do you make?
What are they calling you now? I mean, are you now a crime writer because you wrote the doll and I guess the other one, you were never really here's kind of crimey, I mean, is that now? I mean, it's weird. You get a designation, and it's strange to have that laid on you. And for me, I just sit down to write about it. I get an idea, and the first 3 all tended towards crime, and this one is basically, I guess you could call it a crime novel. It has a crime structure. It's a revenge thriller thing, but I don't care what they call me. Whatever works for them. I'm not one of those guys that's going to fight it. Like, hey, I'm not a crime writer, but because they have to have somewhere to put you on the shelves, and the crime community is very loyal, and if you can get them behind you, then they'll read your other books. They'll go back and read the short stories, and so whatever the very smart people at the publishing company think will sell books, I'm all for. I mean, I write the books and I turn them in, and I don't consult with them beforehand, and they have no idea what's coming across the transom. I mean, I'll say like, well, I think the worst thing I said was, well, I think I'm going to write another book of short stories after I'd written 2 novels. And I could tell even though it was over the phone, I could tell they'd thrown their hands up in the air and just said, no, please don't do that. Because, I like writing short stories, and everybody tells me how much they love short stories, but nobody buys the books. So, but I had the stories done and I wanted to do it. So I did it. Same kind of thing with this, I had a nice little role going as a crime writer. And then I go and say, I'm going to write this, of mice and men meet with vampires. And once again, I could tell it was not quite what they wanted, but they supported me, and it's worked so far.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't think much about the labels myself. I romanticized in my mind the crime writer, the pulp writer, the Jim Thompsons, these guys that just cranked out so many books and were sometimes obscure, but I just was like, no, love this stuff. I mean, it's not Richard Powers, or Calvino or something, but I'm just
Right.
like going nuts over this stuff. You made me think of, there was this German writer I read 20 or 30 years ago, when you said like a French novel all at one dinner. It was a wonderful, very experimental German writer. And there was one book that was all one paragraph. And I think it was just a man sitting in front of a fire, almost like a German Nicholson Baker. I
Right.
remember loving that book. It was, and then another one didn't work as well, but it was so like you were just in this guy's mind, sitting in a chair in front of a fireplace.
And some people can really do it well. Like Beckett,
Yeah.
You can read. I mean, Beckett does things where it's just a guy sitting and talking. And he can do it well. But like I said, I wanted to sell. I wanted to at least try to sell books. And I figured on my first try, I better go with something pretty. Who knows? By the end, I may be writing books of a guy sitting in a room, just thinking to himself. I might work up to that. It might just take me time. I'm still learning to write novels, so who knows where I'm going to go?
Yeah, well, the books reflect a guy just sitting in a room, because what we're reading is the movie that plays in your head with these characters, and then we get to see the dream that was in your mind that you put down into sentences, and then we have that dream. So in a sense, you are writing about a guy sitting in that.
It's true. I mean, meta. I mean, if you want to,
with the.
I always say that when people say, do you identify with your characters? I say, well, I made them. Like, they're all me. And I always relate it back to someone once told me, like, when you have a dream, that's not your mother in the dream, and that's not your dad or your sister. That's you making your mother and your dad and your sister. It's not the actual person itself. So same thing when you're writing a book. The worst villain is somehow coming from inside me, and I tend to try to not make the villains completely, villainy. Like, I try to add human stuff, and so their thoughts are my thoughts. So I guess you could get into that, and how are you able to get into these people's minds? But every thought they've had, I've had, because I wrote it down there. So it's I understand what you're saying about that.
Well, I wanted to ask you, this is sort of a structure thing, because you talked about the convergence theory of your novels, and that different writers employ. And so in Rovers, you have the Jesse chapters, which are in the third person, kind of omniscient.
He's the really the younger brother, but he's the brother who's taking care of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have Edgar's chapter, who's the the Lenny,
mentally challenged guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like,
and they're told through his mind, which I'm really glad that I hit on that. That wasn't the intention in the beginning. It's just I sat down and started doing it, and it draws back on the Benji Compson from Sound and the Fury, and there have been other examples where they've narrated from inside a mentally challenged person's head, but this guy actually carries a lot. He has to sometimes describe plot, but mainly what it was great for was because if you only saw him from outside, it would just be this big mentally challenged guy. And by having those chapters where he's talking, you get to find out that he has this rich inner life, and it actually has emotions, and you know, I was able to start steering things in the direction I wanted it to go, you know, about his character by using that. And I think it just made the character richer and added a lot more to it, and made him a big part of the book, bigger than he would have been if he would have just been the mentally challenged brother that the other guy had to deal with. So that was a happy piece of happenstance that I figured that out pretty early on.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you, because you have those two sections, then you have the diary sections of the Charles character, and then you have another third person where we're following the fiends. So, and yet the story, you know, because it is a thriller and a page turner, is moving like this. We're moving towards this moment where, of course, they all converge.
Right.
So did you write all the Charles diaries as one piece, or were you going from Charles into third person? Like, because for me, in any book I've written, in any kind of story, I'm very linear oriented for the most part. Like, I start at the beginning and I move towards the end. There's something I want to get to, and I move the reader through time. Even when I would write essays, I was very clear. Like, I would even put like timestamps for each section, because I feel linearity, moving through time,
keeps people moving, right?
Draws the reader forward. And so this obviously is moving through time, yet you had 4 different timelines in a sense. So
I sat down and started right at the beginning, and then, like I said, I wrote the first Jesse chapter, and then I decided, wait, I'm going to do Edgar in first person. So I just wrote that one, and it just went through that. That was the most difficult challenge on this book, was the structure, because it's those 4 narrators, and they're always in the same order. I never changed up the order once. So there's always going to be the first one will always be there's 8 sections of 4 chapters each, and the first one is always Jesse, Edgar, Charles, the diary, and then the fiends. And it got really difficult to try to work. How am I going to work the story, and who's seen what, and what happens through whose eyes, in order to keep that structure? And I had it perfect to the end, like all the way to the end, until my wife read the book. I mean, and that was a lot. I mean, that was probably, like I said, it was the hardest part of the book, was figuring out how. It was kind of like in poetry when you're trying to rhyme, you know, an end gem, and then you bring it down here, and you're trying to count it and figure it out. And then my wife reads it, and she says, you know, that's not, it originally ended with the 2 vampires in Italy. And she said, that's not really the ending. You know, here's the ending. She went back to an earlier chapter and said, this is what has to happen. And so I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. You fucked up all my work, because I now have to pull out this one little section and put it at the end, and it ruins my perfect symmetry I created. But she was absolutely right. I mean, it made the book. I'm a believer in strong endings, because I think, you know, the last thing people read is you know, going to stick with them, and that's what they'll walk away from a story or a book with. So I always try to build up to something really good. I always notice Elmore Leonard's endings are like not like that. They're just like, and then he drove off. You know, like he always ends his book like that. I still can't get away from these, you know, operatic crescendos, because I think that's, you know, they'll remember that as they close the book. They might have hated, you know, something earlier in the book, but that ending, if I can get them on that, then, you know, they'll at least leave the book feeling good. So in this case, I have to thank my wife for making that possible.
So, and as you were describing it, I tried once, and it's a book I put in the drawer at the moment, a convergence thing, because that's also something one of my heroes, Richard Stark, does a lot in the Parker books.
Yep.
And you always love it, like when you see Parker from this other character's perspective, or in your book, now we see Jesse from Edgar's perspective, or we see the fiends from Jesse's perspective, and so on. It's always fun when, like, suddenly we're out of their thing, and then we see them through another eye. But so, and then as you were describing that, I was like, oh, because, you know, maybe if I ever try a convergence thing, I like because structure is helpful, you know, and so
Yeah. Oh,
like,
yeah. For
you're very
me,
much
definitely.
like, it's like, you know, Jesse, Edgar, Charles, Fiends, Jesse, Edgar, Charles, Fiends.
Right.
Then like you're able to then roll the story forward. Charles will fill in this bit. Boom,
Mhm.
we're moving forward. We're the reader's getting to the point of convergence.
Exactly.
But did you break it for the ending? Was it like I don't know that
Yeah, it breaks because
what is
uh,
it, Jesse or
Jesse comes back. That's the last half of Jesse's last chapter got pulled out and put at the very end. So, you know, theoretically, there should then be an Edgar chapter, a Charles chapter, and a Fiends chapter. But it originally ended with a Fiends chapter, and then my wife made me pull out part of that the Jesse chapter and put that at the end. And you know the end. I'm not going to say it, but
right? But it feels like you could do that in a sense, because at the end you do like a twist, like a gymnast, and
right.
come back to Jesse. I'm still
Yeah.
not clear what should have been the ending. The Fiend.
The ending was the last Fiends chapter. It was the two vampires in Italy.
I see.
The couple that you liked.
Okay, all right.
That's how it ended.
Yeah, but what's cool, Jesse, then is the beginning always. So it ends.
Well, see, then I didn't even think of that mirroring. Like, oh shit, like the mirroring of the dream at the beginning. I'm an idiot when I'm. It's all. Yeah, it's all. I'm an idiot when I'm writing this stuff. I don't even see what's there in front of me that I've done. Sometimes I never let anybody read my stuff before I give it to my agent, except my wife. She gets to read it, and just I'm starting to think maybe I should let someone else. Actually, I let two people read this book before in manuscript, but I told them they couldn't say a word to me about it. So I don't know what use that was to me, because I didn't want them to say anything that would influence me.
Maybe if you knew if they absolutely hated it, they would it'd be like a fire alarm. They would break the thing and be like, Richard, no, or maybe secretly you're hoping.
You know what? But I'm not going to trust their opinion. That's the shit. That's the thing about it. I'm going to be like, that guy's
so weird. I bet they didn't even read it then.
I don't know. I had this urge to have someone read it, and I gave it out. It's the first time I've ever done that, and but like I said, I didn't get anything out of it because I wouldn't let them talk to me about it at all until I turned in the manuscript and it was bought and it was ready to go. I didn't let them say anything. So.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like
but if I could get good suggestions like my wife gave me, maybe the books would be 100 times better. And I just don't know.
Oh, it's a really good book. Whatever you did right. And and look, if you have one good reader, in the case of your wife, then the next phase you have the editor and the agent. Sounds like your system's working well.
Yeah.
So let's see. And then I guess this will be maybe my last question before we open it up to the audience. And it's somewhat related to like these 4 sections again, because like I said, 2 are third person, 2 are kind of first person, because like one's a diary, and then one,
which is a callback. That's an homage to Dracula, the book, because it was an epistolary novel. It was all letters, diaries, transcriptions of wire recordings. I guess at the turn of the century or whatever, the late 1800s, they had wire recorders. So there are these transcriptions or newspaper articles. So I kind of, once again, like I wasn't really thinking that until I sat down and started doing it. I go, hey, that they had letters in Dracula, so this fits. It fits perfectly into the thing.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't know, if you were at an altar, you're like, here's a coin, like you know what I mean, like because you're at the altar of Dracula, and like just even that illusion, if no one picks it up, or if they do pick it up, you're like sort of paying honor to this, this.
And I gave him, and the dedication was from Dracula too. It's like I was able to, even though I'm not like a horror fan, I did read Dracula when I was a kid and was like fairly obsessed with it, the book. But I was happy that I was able to figure out, just little ways to do that.
Yeah. So my question then is, do you have a preference, third person, first person? Like, do you, because you seem extremely adept at them all, like your short stories. I think the book I have, it felt like maybe it might have been all first person.
If it's the first one, it's all first person. Yeah.
Yeah. And then this Wicked World, I gave it to my dad, so I couldn't check it, but I
It's
feel
third.
like that third.
Third.
Yeah. And because you're
all the novels have been third.
uh-huh.
For some reason that, seemed to, well, except for this one, which has some sections, but it just seemed when I sat down to write novels that worked better for me. I would like to try it. I mean, I obviously like to write first person because all my early work was first person stuff. And I've always been striving though to find this perfect third person that is almost first person, like it's a thing that I've been looking for. And I'm trying to think of writers I know who can do it, where you're so invested in the narrator's perspective that it almost reads as first person, yet you can still do things like description, which, I don't really like doing that in first person because I don't think of someone sitting down. I mean, I'd have to do a different kind of narrator, but my narrators are usually pretty inarticulate. And so to have them sit down and say if they took a trip to the Grand Canyon and describe the Grand Canyon, I couldn't do that in a first person. I'd have to figure out some way. So that's why I've always been looking for this way to combine first and third in the thing. And I'm getting closer and closer to it. I remember I was trying it in college and I cursed in the third person while talking about a character as if the character was the character. It wasn't the character's voice. It was the third person narrator cursing. And I remember I got kind of chided by my writing teacher, like, nah, you can't really do that in third person. Like that's not, that doesn't work that way. You're breaking some rule or something. But I've since gone on to do it a bunch of times. I mean, in the course of looking for this certain voice. But yeah, I would love to write first person. Somewhere, I mean, truthfully, those chapters were the easiest chapters to write, like Edgar, were the easiest chapters to write because they were in first person. I could just sort of let go. I always feel I'm much more controlled in third, but like I said, once again, I'm trying to write these novels that keep moving and don't bog down. And it seems like third person works best to keep things pumping along.
Yeah, well, in the third, you're kind of like a god. But the thing is that I do feel that with your third person, like with This Wicked World, a novel I recommend of Richard's, those of you who haven't read it, was my introduction to you. And I think I just happened to go in Skylight Books and saw it on the shelf, and I was just like, oh, this looks interesting. And, then I came and heard you read at Skylight, I think from the Smack. The Smack. And anyway, but like with This Wicked World, you were so close to the bartender, or so in his head, or in the opening, which was this brilliant opening about the young man, I don't want to give things away, who is going to be the center of the mystery, that you really do.
Death scene.
Yeah, I mean, that was like an incredible, I don't know, opening 5 or 10 pages of a novel. I remember just really being blown away by it as this kind of like prologue. It was very cinematic in a sense of like, because we're never going to see this character again, but you so empathize with his struggle and his suffering that then he becomes like the raison d'etre,
right,
for the mystery that follows, because we so care about what happened to him in that beginning that we do want justice for him.
Right.
Anyway,
so I see. You can see then. What I'm trying to do is get super close in on the characters. In that third person where you almost think you almost forget it's third. But
well, I think you achieved that. For me, I've only written the one book in the third person. You Were Never Really Here, because I was always scared of it. That thing of certain rules where you are breaking, the voice or having, but it can be confusing. I somehow pulled it off in there, but then with A Man Named Doll, I kind of reverted back to first person, which I'd always used for essays and novels. And Anyway, but let's.
And it works well. It works well in the detective genre thing. I mean, that's the standard voice, and you create such a good character in that PI doll that I think it's good that you keep it in first person because he's super unique, and the observations seem like they need to be first person and not third person. They need to be, because it's his voice you're hearing. I mean, and his particular things, like, as we talk, we didn't get a chance, we'll talk dogs later, but
yeah. One of the things, audience out there, I don't know how many people are out there, but is that Richard and I both have a dog, love dogs, and we thought, oh God, if we totally stall out, we can just go into like dog love.
Yeah, how much we love dogs. I can do that for hours.
Well, Hallie, do you want to tell Richard some of the questions that are coming in? It looks like there's 4 so far.
Yeah, my questions are now all about, I just want to hear you talk about dogs. So, but we have a question from Josh, who says, I love the voice of this novel. It's so different from your other books. It sounds like someone from the Midwest or Southwest from the 70s, not modern at all, which is great. Was it hard to capture that voice of the 70s era?
Yeah, I actually tried for each, like for the Jesse chapters, I tried to do this thing where they used archaic Lange, him and his brothers, sort of when they talk, because they'd been around since the late 1800s, they use a combination of modern language and old language. So a lot of old terms for things, like they call their suitcases a grip, and in that was, nobody was saying that in the 70s, but it's like a 30s or 40s word they could have used. And they speak in a they also have a lot of Southern elements to their speech because they're from West Virginia. So they I put that in, but working with the language on their 2 chapters was interesting. You just have to be careful, you just have to always keep in mind where it's set and make sure that you're not, having people say things that nobody, I hate books when I read them and it's supposed to be the 70s and someone says something that nobody was saying in the 70s. It always bothers me. And, I'm a researcher at heart. That's what that's one of the big things about the books that I love, is doing the research. And like in this book was hard in research because it actually takes place over 5 real days. So one example, I wanted to write this scene in the desert at night and have the moon. I had the moon in it and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, you know what? I better go check the moon on June 27th, 1976. And I got the moon thing on the computer and looked it up. And sure enough, over the whole course of the novel, the moon goes from being a sliver to no moon to the sliver on the other side. So in the whole book at night, that takes place at night, I couldn't use the moon to really light anything. But, people said, you can get away with that. But I'm like, nah, someone's going to come up to me and I'm going to be so bummed when they say, the moon wasn't full on that night. So that's just an aside. Sorry.
That's cool.
How else did you do research? This is my question.
It's mostly I used the internet. Phoenix, I'd never been to Phoenix. I mean, a lot of the book takes place in Phoenix. I've been to Tucson, and I grew up in Bakersfield, which is kind of Phoenixy, but I just went heavily went into old Phoenix sites and the history of Phoenix's downtown and found all these things. And you can find amazing things in the internet. I had to do the Edgar, the mentally challenged brother, is obsessed with cartoon hosts, which probably they're not around anymore. But when I was a kid, every town had, like Stockton had Captain Delta, and he dressed up like a sea captain, and he sat in a little fake paddle wheel boat, and he introduced the Popeye cartoons and the Three Stooges shorts, and he also did ads for the local toy store or whatever. Come down and meet Captain Delta at the toy store. But so I did research online. And that was great because when I'm doing research, I don't have to write, so I got to look at old video of, I didn't need it, but once I went down the rabbit hole, I was watching, videos of these cartoon hosts in all the cities in the 60s and the 70s and kind of going into their lives. There's a whole book to be written about that. Believe me, Pinky Lee's life story would be a great novel in itself. This vaudevillian who has fallen into hosting a TV kid show, but yeah, then the research is a big element, and it's mostly online. But I normally also never write about somewhere I haven't visited. So Phoenix, I mean, I've been in Vegas a million times. I even was there in the 70s when I'd go with my parents, and I have vague memories of that. Most of the other places in the book, Reno is in the book. I've been there, Portland. So I like to write about places I've been. I like to at least put my feet there and like look around a little. And I don't know, I just feel better about it. It might not really help, but for me, it just feels more authentic when I can do that. So like I said, as much, I set all my other books in my neighborhood. So, all the crime books were all set, MacArthur Park, which is, 2 miles over here, or in Hollywood, which is 2 miles over here. So, that made it easy to do the research on those.
Thank you. Another question from Lefty, who says, I love the cover of Rovers. It really grabs your attention. Is there a story behind how it was created or picked?
Yeah. Do you know me, Lefty? Have you heard me bitch about this before? But there was an original cover that they sent, and it looked like I won't show it because I don't want to embarrass the artist, and it was terrible. It was purple, and it looked like the cover of a comic book, and it had the bikers riding through the night, and it was a drawing, and it was awful. And so I just wrote back and said, no, I mean, luckily they're pretty cool about that. I've had disputes about other covers with them, and always it seems like when they come back with the second effort, it's really good. And in this case, I think they did an outstanding job. I sent them like the Nashville poster. I went through and looked at other movie posters that had used the American flag thing. I think Joe, maybe the movie Joe with Peter Boyle. Like these movies that used the American flag as a theme. I sent them biker patches and all kinds of, tons of inspiration stuff. And they came back with a silly one. But then the second time they actually hit it, and they kind of got what I wanted, this red, white, and blue. Yeah, thanks. The red, white, and blue theme. And now it kind of thrills me to see those three characters there. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. They're actually like pictured on the cover. So yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah, I love the printing press quality of it too.
Yeah.
That's really cool. This question is anonymous, and they say, is there a film adaptation in the works?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, right now, as we speak, they're hammering out a TV deal for a series. We'll see what happens. That I've had, and Jonathan can attest to this, that you get deals all the time, and they often don't pan out. But I have high hopes for this one. I think it's a rich world that could go a lot of different ways. I got a email from a producer the other day who called it the Walking Dead of vampire books. He goes, you could franchise, you could have so many different, shows come off this book. And I thought, that's great. Said, prepare to be very rich. And I said, that's great. So unfortunately, he's not the one doing the deal. So, but he's right. There is a lot of possibility to go a lot of different ways with this kind of world that's created here.
There's also like a Highlander quality, because you could see things from the past, and
yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of fun that way.
Yeah, you could do a whole season set in the 1890s, or whenever you want it. So
yeah, or it's like Wolverine in the Marvel world, like when you see him running in the World War I trench or something.
Yep.
And the characters could just have their own kind of spin-off shows too.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question. This one is from Tina, who says, "Hey Richard, I heard there would be an audiobook version. Did you get to pick the reader?"
No, I did not. It's, it was an interesting story about that. I'd never had an audiobook before, so I was super excited when they came to me with the, they told me that it was going to happen. They sent me the reader, and he was good. It was just sounded like an older white guy. But then I wrote them and said, got in touch and said, but there's all these chapters that are narrated by it's a black man's diary. The father Charles, who's looking for his son, whose diary entries are about a quarter of the book, is a black guy. And I was like, I don't know how that is gonna work. Maybe, we should rethink that a little bit. And they're like, oh, which makes me think they probably didn't even read the whole book. They just read the first 2 chapters and, got this going. But they ended up getting a really good African-American actor to do the Charles diary entries. And so it made the audiobook even better to have these 2 narrators going back and forth.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Any final questions or thoughts before we head to the signing?
No, I got to get dressed, put on pants, and get over there, don't I?
You're not wearing pants? What is this? Network news?
It's a nightmare. Well, I want to thank you both so much for being here, for writing Rovers, and Jonathan for your questions.
Thank you, Jonathan, for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. I love the book. Love all your books. I mean, I think I have 1 or 2 I haven't read, but anyone out there, find Richard's stuff. It's a beautiful blend of great storytelling and very beautiful prose. And yeah, I just love the books and the paper.
Thanks. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's here in the audience. We hope to see you later. If not, you can order a signed copy of Rovers right here on the internet. Yeah, and thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.